The room was quiet, an almost deafening silence that seemed to wrap itself around the walls like a suffocating blanket. Everyone held their breath. The soft, artificial light from the hospital's sterile overhead lights flickered slightly, casting a pale, ghostly glow over the scene. The faint hum of machines in the background felt distant, almost muffled, as though they, too, were giving space to the intense moment unfolding before them. The air itself seemed to pause in expectation. A room full of people, all focused on one small, fragile girl and the dog she held so tightly in her arms. Lily, barely 13, sat on the cold metal exam table, her feet unable to reach the floor, dangling. Like a child in a grown-up world, her pale face was streaked with tears, her eyes red from the grief and fear that had overwhelmed her heart. She had her arms wrapped tightly around Lucky, the German shepherd that had been by her side through the darkest of times. His body was limp, heavy, yet still warm, his breaths shallow and labored, like the slow ticking of a clock counting down the last of his time. Every labored exhale seemed to echo in the room, reminding everyone of the finality that loomed just ahead. Lily's heart ached and her grip on him tightened. His fur, once thick and full, was now thinning, and it felt like everything she had known for so long was slipping away. No one spoke, unable to find the words to interrupt the agony of that moment. One nurse, who had been standing closest to the door, clutched her hands over her mouth, trying to stifle her own tears. Another nurse, unable to bear the heart-wrenching sight, turned away. Even the doctor, who had prepared himself to end the suffering, stood silent, unsure of how to break the news in a way that wouldn't break the young girl in front of him. Behind Lily, her mother, Emily, stood quietly, torn between her professional instincts as an animal behaviorist and the overwhelming grief of a mother witnessing her daughter in such pain. She had seen so many cases in her career, many heartbreaking, but never one that felt this personal, this raw. Lily was her everything, and watching her struggle to keep the only source of comfort she had left, the only constant in her young life, was something Emily wasn't prepared for. But she had always been practical, grounded in facts, and she knew this was the hardest decision she had ever faced. Lucky's time, as much as they all wished it wasn't true, had come. The sound of the door swinging open brought the room's stillness to an abrupt halt. A woman in a white coat stormed in, holding a folder in her hand. Her presence was commanding, and the sharpness of her voice cut through the silence like thunder. "Wait! Stop! Don't do it yet!" she cried urgently, her eyes wide with a sense of desperate determination. It felt as if the entire room collectively exhaled, yet at the same time, everyone remained on edge. In that single moment, everything changed. Lucky had not always been the gentle, loyal dog lying against Lily's chest in her final moments with him. 5 years earlier, he had been an entirely different creature. Once considered too dangerous for anyone to handle, Lucky had been labeled as aggressive and unpredictable. At the animal rescue center, no one dared approach him. He paced relentlessly in his cage, barking furiously at shadows, flinching away from any human touch. He had earned his reputation as a troubled dog. No one would adopt him, but Lily, just 7 years old at the time, had walked into the shelter with her mother. While other children would have shyly clung to their parents, afraid of the wild dog pacing in his cage, Lily had approached Lucky's kennel without hesitation. Kneeling down, she whispered softly through the bars of his cage. To everyone's surprise, Lucky stopped barking. For the first time, he stood still. His posture relaxed, and his eyes, full of confusion and uncertainty, met hers. It was as if something in her presence, her unwavering calm, made him trust her. Emily, as an animal behaviorist, had been tasked with assessing Lucky's behavior. She'd assumed the task would be simple, a quick evaluation and a likely recommendation. for euthanasia. But when she saw the connection between Lily and the dog, something shifted. She carefully introduced them under close supervision. To her amazement, Lucky didn't snap or growl. He pressed his forehead gently against Lily's small hand, accepting her touch in a way no one had ever seen him do before. That day marked a turning point, not just for Lucky, but for the entire family. Lily, with her quiet compassion and unwavering belief, had saved him. She named him Lucky, even though, at the time, it felt like an ironic choice. No one believed he'd ever be the type of dog who could be trusted, let alone loved. But Lily, even at her young age, saw something in him that others couldn't. She believed in him when no one else did. Lucky's transformation at home was nothing short of miraculous. He went from a scared, aggressive dog to the heart and soul of their family. He became Lily's constant companion, her protector, and the dog who lay beside her through every season of her growing up. He chased butterflies in the backyard, barked joyfully at the mailman, and curled up beside her every night to sleep. Emily often joked that if Lucky were ever sick, their house would feel 10 people emptier. But one quiet morning, everything changed. It was a Saturday, soft sunlight filtering through the windows, casting gentle patterns on the floor. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. Lily's parents had left early that morning for a family visit, leaving her in charge for the day. She had planned to spend the morning with Lucky, just the two of them. But when she went to check on him, she was greeted with an unsettling sight. Lucky wasn't waiting by the door as usual, tail wagging, eager to greet her. Instead, he was lying in the corner of the living room, his head down, his eyes dull and tired. The familiar spark of life in his eyes was gone. Lily rushed to his side, calling out to him softly, trying to coax him into movement. She tried everything. She could think of warm soup, his favorite peanut butter treat, even cheese, but nothing worked. Lucky didn't eat. He barely moved. His breathing was shallow and labored. Worried, Lily called her parents, her voice shaky and filled with concern. Within the hour, they were on their way to the animal hospital. Lily sat in the back seat with Lucky, cradling his head in her lap. Her heart pounded and her breath was unsteady, but she stayed calm, trying to comfort him. At the animal hospital, the hours stretched on. Lily sat in the waiting room, clutching Lucky's leash, her eyes never leaving the door to the treatment room. Emily stood beside her, her face pale, her professional experience in animal care offering little comfort in the face of the unknown. She had seen countless animals come and go, but this time was different. This was Lucky, the dog who had become family. Finally, the vet walked into the room, her face somber. "It's a large mass in his abdomen," she said gently, holding the chart. "It's likely a tumor, and we can operate, but given his age and condition, there's only about a 30% chance of survival." The words felt like a punch to the gut. Lily's heart dropped, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. 30% wasn't a chance. It was a sliver of hope, a fragile thread holding everything together. She looked at Emily, eyes brimming with tears. "But I don't want to lose him," Lily whispered, her voice shaking with the weight of the impossible decision. Emily, ever the calm one, squeezed her daughter's shoulder. "We have to give him a chance, even a small one," she said, her voice full of steady resolve. With trembling hands, Emily signed the consent form, and Lily leaned over to rest her forehead against Lucky's side, promising him, "I'm here, I'll stay with you." The hours stretched long through the night, with Lily never leaving Lucky's side. She fed him warm broth and whispered stories into his ears. Every sound, every small twitch of his body sent her heart into a spiral of panic and hope. She didn't sleep. She wouldn't leave him. Every minute felt like a lifetime. When the nurse came in at 2 a.m., she smiled gently at Lily. "You should try to rest. she said, her voice soft and reassuring, but Lily just shook her head. "How can I rest when my whole world is lying on that table?" she whispered. And so she stayed, determined to be there for Lucky, determined to make sure he knew he was loved. The morning arrived quietly. Emily and her husband arrived early, their faces drawn with exhaustion. They hadn't slept either. Lily, though tired and worn, still held Lucky's paw, never letting go as the vet team prepared him for surgery. At 9 a.m., the operating room doors closed and Lily stood, watching through the glass, her eyes fixed on the place where Lucky had just been wheeled in. The waiting was unbearable. The minutes dragged on, and every passing second felt like an eternity. 5 hours. It felt like a lifetime. Every minute that passed stretched into what seemed like an eternity. The waiting room was filled with the scent of antiseptic, the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall. Each second seemed to crawl, each one heavier than the last. And Lily sat, unmoving, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Every so often, she would glance at the door, her heart racing, her breath shallow as she waited for any sign of good news. Her thoughts were jumbled, racing through memories of better days, of the moments she had shared with Lucky, the dog who had been there for her through everything. She had never felt this kind of fear before. This was not just about a dog. This was her best friend, her protector, the one who had been by her side since she was a child. Lily couldn't bear the thought of losing him. Not now. Not after everything they'd been through. Finally, the door to the examination room opened and the vet emerged. Her scrubs were damp with sweat, her hair pinned back messily, but there was a smile on her face. It was the first sign of hope that Lily had seen in hours. "The surgery was a success," the vet said softly. "We removed the tumor. He's not out of the woods yet, but he made it through." Lily shot to her feet, her entire body trembling with relief. "Can I see him? Can I feed him? Something?" Her voice cracked as she spoke, a mixture of relief and worry flooding her all at once. The vet chuckled softly, clearly touched by Lily's eagerness. "He's in recovery right now, but yes, soon. He'll need gentle food like broth. But we'll take it slow." Lily was already digging through her bag before the vet could even finish her sentence. Her heart was still pounding in her chest, but the weight that had been crushing her felt lighter. When Lucky was wheeled into the recovery room, still groggy but breathing, Lily ran to him, her heart fluttering. She cupped his face in her hands, resting her forehead against his, tears falling freely from her eyes. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You really did it." It was a moment of relief that she had been holding on to for what felt like forever. The next few days at home felt like a quiet celebration. Lucky was back, and although he was slower, weaker, his eyes still followed Lily everywhere she went, and his tail wagged whenever she spoke. It was a comforting reminder that he was still here, still part of their family. Lily set up a soft bed for him by the living room window, surrounding him with his favorite toys and blankets. She made warm broth every morning, just the way the vet had instructed, feeding him with the same devotion she always had. Emily, always the practical one, kept track of every medication, every dose, marking them down with the precision she was known for. The family moved with quiet optimism, hopeful that Lucky was on the mend, that this was truly the beginning of his recovery. But then, on the third night, everything began to unravel. It was dinner time when Lucky refused his food. It wasn't like before, when he would just nibble slowly or take his time with a treat. This time, he turned away from the bowl, trembling slightly, his body unnaturally hot to the touch. His breath came in shallow bursts, faster than usual, and his eyes were glassy, filled with confusion and discomfort. A soft whimper escaped from him. louder and longer than any sound Lily had ever heard from him before. Panic shot through her, sharp and instant. "Something's wrong," she said, her voice trembling with fear. Her father, noticing the change in Lucky's condition, placed his hand gently on the dog's back. Even he could feel the rising fever. They rushed him back to the animal hospital. The drive felt endless, and this time the waiting room felt colder, heavier. Tests were done. Blood was drawn. Scans were repeated. Lily, clutching Lucky's leash, didn't move from her spot. Her eyes were fixed on the door, unwilling to look away for even a second. Emily stood beside her, her face drawn with concern, trying to comfort her daughter, but her own heart was breaking. She had seen many animals in her care, but this situation felt different. It was personal. It was Lucky, the dog that had saved. Lily, the dog that had become their family. The vet emerged at last, her face grave. "There's no sign of infection spreading," she said slowly, her voice quiet but filled with a heavy sorrow. "But he's not responding the way we'd expect. His body might just be too weak." Lily felt as though the world had tilted beneath her feet. Not again, not after everything they had been through. Lucky had already beaten so much. He couldn't be giving up now. She stared at him, lying motionless under the sterile light of the clinic, his breathing shallow and strained, and felt a cold wave of dread wash over her. Then came the worst blow. The vet gently suggested what no one wanted to hear. "We may need to consider giving him a peaceful end without pain," she said softly. The words felt like a knife slicing through Lily's chest. She shook her head violently, her hands gripping Lucky's frail body. "No, please don't say goodbye yet," she whispered, her voice breaking. She couldn't bear the thought of losing him, not after everything they had fought for. Not after everything he had meant to her. The vet stepped aside, giving Lily and her family a moment alone. Emily knelt next to her daughter, wrapping her arms around her as Lily collapsed into her arms, crying into Lucky's fur. The silence in the room was heavy with grief and uncertainty. But then, as if sent by fate, the door burst open. A younger vet, Dr. Ramirez, rushed in, holding a chart. In one hand, an urgency etched on her face. "Wait, don't administer anything," she shouted, her voice cutting through the stillness. "There's something wrong here." Everyone turned to look at Dr. Ramirez as she crossed the room quickly, laying the chart on the counter. "I just reviewed Lucky's blood work again," she said, her brow furrowed. "His infection markers are spiking, but they shouldn't be this high. Not with the antibiotics we've been giving him." The senior vet frowned, shaking her head. "He might just be failing," she said softly. "No," Dr. Ramirez interrupted, shaking her head. "This isn't consistent with typical organ failure. His vitals are erratic, but not collapsing. Something else is going on here." Her eyes narrowed as she thought. "I think we missed something. We need another ultrasound now." The team sprang into action. Within minutes, they wheeled Lucky back into the exam room, and Lily, her palms pressed against the glass, watched as they worked. Her heart was racing. Time seemed to stop as she stood frozen, unable to move, unable to cry. She was too stunned, too shocked to allow herself the release of tears. Minutes passed, and it felt as though hours were slipping away. The waiting room was quiet except for the soft sounds of nurses passing by and the occasional rustle of paper. Then a soft knock on the waiting room door. Dr. Ramirez appeared, her face pale but composed. "We found it," she said. "There's a foreign object inside his abdomen. It's likely surgical gauze left from the previous operation. We need to remove it immediately." Lily's heart skipped. Hope. The word echoed in her mind, and for the first time in hours, she felt something stir inside her. "There's still a chance," Dr. Ramirez added gently. "And now we know exactly what we're fighting." The moment Lily heard those words, hope seemed to bloom again, fragile and tentative but real. Lily held her breath as she watched the ultrasound. Room door close. She wasn't crying anymore. She couldn't. She had no tears left. But she held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, they weren't too late. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lily allowed herself to believe.